I'd like to talk today a little bit about the love of knowledge. Myself and most of the people that I interact with regularly have this love or lust, whatever you may call it, for knowledge. We constantly are bombarding ourselves with new ideas and new thoughts and sharing them with each other because we enjoy doing that. And while it might go without saying for some people, I've experienced a lot of anti-intellectualism throughout my lifetime, particularly in junior high and high school. And this seemed to be spawned from the dislike of required courses and required texts. I knew a lot of people, some of them even my friends, that were turned off by learning or reading entirely because of requirements made by the schools. They were disinterested in the subjects they were learning about, or in the way that the teachers were presenting these subjects, and they were generally disinterested in the pieces of literature that we had to read. And they took the disinterest in those few isolated things and turned it into the idea that they are just generally against these things. It spawned this feeling of anti-intellectualism. And I found it kind of disgusting for a while. I still do find it disgusting that this might be happening, that people don't want to read or learn, or may not be reading or learning of their own accord. And if you find that these things that I'm saying pertain to you, I'm not going to try to force you to read, and I'm not going to try to force you to learn, but I'm fairly certain that there is a subject out there for everyone. And maybe school didn't inspire you to seek these things, maybe it didn't introduce you to these things, but I promise there's something out there that is worth your time and worth the energy to learn. It could be something small. Say you hear a reference in a television show that you don't quite understand. You utilize the internet to look up what that reference is, and it might lead you down a path that, you hear one thing, look it up, learn one thing from that, discover that, hey, you actually find this topic pretty interesting, and you look deeper. The web series Extra Credits covered this as it pertains to video games in a video they did about tangential learning. Tangential learning. I'll put a link to that in the description down below, and you should probably check that out, especially if you have an interest in video games and maybe find yourself playing more video games than you do reading books or learning. Maybe this will be a nice segue from one to the other for you. Because it's important to read, and it's important to learn in order to grow as a human being. Because if you're not growing, you're in a stagnant state, and the more people that we have that are refusing to grow, that are refusing to learn, are keeping themselves and society in a more stagnated state. And at this point in time, we can't really afford to have that. So, attempt, please, to find something that interests you and learn about it. It can be really fun once you get started. Don't let experiences that you may have had in school discourage you from reading or learning, because the extent of knowledge and the extent of literature don't end at school. They barely begin at school. It's a starting point. And if it proved a poor starting point for you, don't let that discourage you. Think of a sprinter. You know a sprinter when you see them about to run the 100-yard dash, and they're sitting there all posed up, and they have their foot against that little block? I don't remember exactly how it's shaped. I used to be in track. I probably should. But, little block that they have their foot on, and then the person with the gun fires it and everyone goes. Let's imagine that that little block is school as your starting point. Now some people, this little block proves to be very beneficial for. They fire the gun, time to start, and they push their foot against that block, and they're off. Let's say that this sprint is a sprint towards knowledge. Now, let's say you were one of the unfortunate souls who had this block when the gun fired and you pushed off slip out from under your foot. Something in school happened to make you dislike reading, to dislike learning, slipped out under your foot. It's bad that that happened, but if that happens and you give up entirely, you're only holding yourself back. If that happens and you get up and run, even if you don't win, even if you're not the fastest, you at least still tried. You're doing something. And it's important not to let things get in the way of your growth. and your expansion as a human being. So for the love of knowledge, get out and read something, anything, and use that as a starting point for something bigger and better, for something greater. Hopefully this makes sense to someone. Hopefully this inspires at least one person. If it does, then my job here is done.